Hey readers, I'm Danny.
And I'm Leandra, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading 1/3 of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Hey readers, welcome to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are continuing our read of The Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Wrobel. This is actually our final month for our first season of Genre Blends. It's kind of crazy. Next month in May, we are going to be transitioning into our translations season. And just in case you need to put holds in or maybe order your book ahead of time, in May, we will be reading Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. But today is all about the Hitchcock Hotel, and what we've read up to is all of Act 1 and all of Act 2. So make sure that you're at the same point we are, because we will be discussing with full spoilers. But before we get to that point, we have our bookish bite. And my question for you today, and to Danny, is how we feel about predictability. What are our thoughts about predictable storylines, and what are our thoughts about surprising storylines? Danny, what are you thinking?
I would say my answer to that question is it depends. I think that I like a predictable narrative if I'm in the mood for nostalgia or something cozy. Like if I just want to relax and I don't want to if my brain doesn't want to grow, I guess, and I don't want to have to really I don't wanna say not pay attention, but if I don't want my brain to be on full power, if I just wanna have a good time with a book, I honestly like a predictable narrative. I think that it's kind of fun to just be there with the story, and maybe I do think those stories don't stick with me as long. They're not gonna be as impactful for me in the long run, so they're most likely not gonna be favorites of mine, but I do think that there is a place, in my bookish life for those types of reads. I like to read them along with something that's more complex, so if I do like for instance, recently I was reading The Failures, which I thought was a very complex book in general for various reasons. But it was really nice to be able to read something very simple along with that to kind of give my brain a little bit of a break. If I was doing a task like cooking dinner while I was reading, I wouldn't necessarily want to be reading The Failures because I would miss important details, and I could pick up an easier read that was a little bit predictable. And so if I missed something because of things going on, in the physical realm around me, it wasn't that big of a deal. What about you?
I'm glad that you brought up the idea of having a predictable narrative as a palate cleanser or a companion to a more complex read. And I know what you mean when you consider the longevity of this narrative being in your mind. With that said, I think that it has a longer shelf life in regards to the potential of rereading, especially if it's clear that the author isn't intending to pull the wool over your eyes. I think that authors who rely too heavily on the excitement of twists or reveals or tricking the reader, those readers are likely not interested in ever rereading this book, because they think that the driving factor of why we're even reading it to the end in the first place is the big reveal. That's coming from a mystery reader who very much knows that mysteries as a genre are reliant on the big reveals. I think that I'm in the minority where I still believe that you can reread mysteries. I reread mysteries all the time and I really love them. But I do think that there's a risk in writing a narrative that is so reliant on having it be unpredictable and trying to trick the reader. With that said, I think that there's a happy balance. Predictability can be a strength, meaning that this is a realistic narrative that is plausible. It should be predictable, especially if we're talking about fair play, right? If this should include A equals B equals C, okay, I see where this narrative is going, then that actually is probably a strength in the author's, canon. But then you're also kind of considering, does the author think they're tricking me? Because that's when a predictable narrative can be really frustrating, Because if the author thinks that they're the cleverest person in the room, and at the point where the reveal happens, once in a while you'll get this where the author is speaking through the narrator saying, "Oh, you believed this," and I was like, "No, I didn't. Actually, let me correct you there." So I think that there has to be an honest, like, indirect discussion between reader and author about how predictable a narrative is going to be, and if we're both mutually okay with that, because I think it's a balancing act, and we have to be on the same page. Because if I'm predicting it and the author thinks I shouldn't be predicting it, then something's off. So something's going wrong here. But I do think that there's comfort in predictability, because a lot of books are predictable in the fact that if we know there's a trope that we absolutely love is in this book, that in essence is telling us that this is predictable, right? A friends to lovers trope, what's going to happen? I'll give you one guess. So I think that we have to be kinder to the idea of predictability being a no go, even though I am 100% someone who has taken away, a rating star if it's too predictable. It just depends. I think, as you said, I'm echoing you. We're pretty much just agreeing through and through that it really depends.
Yeah. Interesting that you bring up, so you were talking about mysteries, and I do think I'm more likely to reread a mystery that is predictable versus like something like a thriller or a romance that's predictable. I find mysteries have more almost breadcrumbs that you can kind of piece together after you know the reveals. If like we're talking about, reveals, in a romance, it could be, what friend was the cause of the third act breakup, or whatever. In a thriller, it could be who the murderer is, or who the person who's causing the mayhem. I definitely feel like certain genres lean into it better for a rereading standpoint, than others. Because I do know that I have read some romances where you have the third act breakup and you're like, okay, they're obviously going to get together, and it does feel very much like, and this isn't all romances by any means. This is just a few that I have read, where it feels like the author is leading you to think that like this is it for the couple, and it's like, no, you know that it's not. Like, it's a romance. They're going to end up together again. And I think that some of that too is just the comings and goings of what is common in books, because I do think that genres, as those things become more and more the norm, I think authors stray further and further away from it. So then we start getting more unique things, and really not even unique, but probably recycled things from 50 years ago that aren't popular anymore. Which, yeah, it all comes back around in a cycle. But I do think that there's a time and a place for predictability in books.
Oh, for sure. And I'm really glad that you brought up this idea that at some point it's kind of genre focused as well. You can reread mysteries. I'm so glad that you're on that train because not only can you try to find the clues that you missed, but you also have your eye on the villain, on the killer, because before you didn't know who it was. So you were bombarded with information, bombarded with different characters. And that's what I love about rereading a mystery, because suddenly I have my eye. It becomes the villain's story. And I'm watching them as they're attempting to get away with the murder or the crime that they committed. We know they're not going to, but it's interesting to kind of consider where their mind is going as they're literally lying to our faces. As the villain is talking to me, I'm like, I know you did it. We're going to find out in like 15 chapters. The same with like fantasy, for instance. There's this idea of obviously rereading a fantasy, there's the predictability of how the world works. But what's really nice is now when those magical systems are going to come into effect, and it
Yeah.
adds to it, and it just you can extend it across various genres. And people who reread romances, it is the comfort of knowing exactly how things go, so I can understand romance readers in that sense too. I would say that the genre that may be the hardest to reread, and I'm happy to be corrected in the comments or in email reactions that we may get, but I think it's thriller. I would imagine that thriller is a genre that's known for its twists. And I've also heard from many sources, many people who started off their reading careers as thriller readers, right? I think the thriller genre, what's great about it is that it's almost a gateway genre for a lot of people who don't really read, and then suddenly they're voracious, and then they start kind of expanding their reading choices. But the one criticism that I hear a lot of people say who at one point were binging thrillers left and right is that once you've discovered, a handful of the twists, none of it's novel anymore. Like the novelty has been taken away. And so I think that's the risk of being so reliant on unpredictability because, story ideas do get recycled. And that's not to say that every single book that gets published is literally a copy and paste of other books, but you do
Right.
see a bit of a Frankensteining, and it depends on what Frankenstein parts you are putting together. What kind of monster are you creating? So, anyways, we could totally talk about this until the cows come home. But what we need to do now is actually dig into the Hitchcock Hotel, and hopefully we can have this conversation of predictability, but through the lens of this book. So, Danny, how about you give us a recap? What actually happened in this second act?
Now, keeping in mind, friends, summarizing this book, at least for me, has been difficult because I feel like this book is very granular and there are a lot of really specific things that we will talk about in our discussion. So keep in mind that the summary is going to be very vague and definitely glance over some things, but we will discuss as we do on the podcast. We'll get into the nitty gritty in just a minute, but for those of you, just to kind of remind you where we are in the book, this act, we are continuing on our weekend in the Hitchcock Hotel with all of our non-friends, former friends of Alfred's that are in the Hitchcock Hotel, and they decide for nostalgic reasons that they are going to watch a film together. This is something that they used to do in college. They were in a film class together, as we talked about in our last episode, and they want to watch a Hitchcock film and discuss. And one of the things that they do while watching this Hitchcock film is they put their phones in a bag and put their bag elsewhere. So they are not distracted. They are wholly concerned with the film and the discussion that will be had after. Some of our characters grumble about this. They really don't like giving away that lifeline, but they do it anyway. And inevitably, things happen where the phones can't be found after the watching of the movie. Alfred is somewhat surprised by this, but he does play it off as it was the concierge. The concierge was the one who took all of the phones and was supposed to put them in a drawer. And so Alfred thinks that maybe the concierge just misunderstood the instructions and put them elsewhere in the hotel. So he offers the guests, his former friends, the phone at the front desk to call their loved ones. As you know, we do have some people in the hotel who have family, who have other people that are waiting outside the hotel that need communication. And so he leaves them to contact their loved ones while he goes and searches the hotel. Him and Danny both leave the scene and search the hotel for the cell phones. And they end up all having dinner very late after they've watched the film. They've all called their loved ones, connected with their loved ones. They have dinner together and decide to go to bed and sleep it off, figure out the cell phone situation in the morning. But our group of friends ends up having a little bit of a surprise in the morning they weren't expecting. And that's where I'm gonna leave the summary. So, for those of you who have not read up through, Act 2, if you guys are still with us at this point, I implore you to leave us, come back whenever you finished Act 2 because there will be significant spoilers in this discussion.
Thanks so much for that summary, Danny. I feel a lot better knowing where we are because you're right. There's a lot of scenes, there's a lot of reveals about characters' backstories, and it's just there's a lot to get through. But where I want to start us, and it's not necessarily right where Act 2 begins, but I think it's a pivotal moment, a pivotal scene, is their viewing of this Hitchcock film. So, according to our main character, Alfred, it was a 1948 Hitchcock film called Rope. I had never heard of it. So this is just one of those nuggets where either you know it or you don't, and you just have to kind of take it. So that's something we can kind of talk about, all of these references and if it's impacting our enjoyment of the plot or not. But what I found fascinating was after watching the film, the discussion that the characters had about what the film represented. It felt like we were honestly back in time in their film class, in their film book club, they were falling back into their roles in how they were reacting to what actually happened in this 1948 film. What I think is especially interesting is that the discussion moves from the activities, the plot of the film, to Hitchcock himself. And they discuss that Alfred Hitchcock wasn't a good guy. I mean, this is speculation. I didn't do my own research after reading this to really validate any of their claims, but I think that it's something that remains topical no matter when you're reading this, because we do have to ask ourselves, and this is a question that we are asked by Alfred Spettel himself, is whether you can separate the artist from the art. I have a quote specifically from Alfred. Why can't I acknowledge his misbehavior while also admiring his art? Can we not separate the art from the artist? No, Zoe says. I don't think we can. And this is something that I think a lot of us, especially as readers, have to grapple with, because we fall in love with authors' characters, with their storylines, but just because an author can write a beautiful character, that doesn't mean that they are a beautiful person, a nice person, or even just a simply purely good person. They could make mistakes, or they could genuinely cause harm to others in their daily lives. And so, how do we grapple with this when we are reading a book? How did you think about that scene? Did you think that it was impactful, or did it make you think about anything in particular? Because I thought it was very relevant to today, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I love it when books take the time to have a conversation like this, and when they don't necessarily give you what the author thinks is the answer, right? We have two people who are very adamantly on separate sides on the issue in the story, and both of them have good points. And I think that that's definitely something that readers, well, and anyone who enjoys any form of art, music, movies, actual like paintings, portraits, and things like that. I think you have to consider the artist behind the art as well, and figure out how you're going to handle it, how you're going to address it, and how that's going to impact either your enjoyment of it or whether or not you shy away from it and remove yourself from certain things. I think that Alfred, was it Zoe that he was talking to? Was Zoe the one that was super adamant? I get her and Grace mixed up. And so Zoe, yeah, it says that she doesn't think that you can, and he essentially throws back in her face that she listens to Michael Jackson. I think it's a viable argument in both sides. I personally think that you should address it. Like, I don't feel like it should be something that's hidden away, but I don't think I would ever judge someone for reading a book or watching a movie from someone who was a horrible person, as long as that horrible behavior is acknowledged at some point in time. I know personally I've dealt with this issue recently, with an author, and I'm not even going to mention his name. It is definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. That it's hurtful. It's hurtful not only to the people that certain behaviors have impacted actually, like in their physical lives, have impacted them, but it's hurtful to their readers as well, because I know a ton of people who, there are lots of books that have authors and storylines that have been in people's lives since their childhood that have been tainted by actions of their authors. And so I do think it's a very important topic to cover. I don't think that there's one set answer. I think that people have to do what feels right for them.
Yeah, and I think that Stephanie Wrobel did a great job of throwing it out there. And she probably had this question herself, looking at herself, writing a book called The Hitchcock Hotel.
Yeah.
She had to do a lot of research on him, and there might have been a moment where she was thinking, should I be shedding light on this man and, screaming his praises for everything he did for film, when in reality he is likely was a horrible person in real life for whatever reason, and how do I feel about that, publishing this, having people read it? And so I think that it was something that Stephanie absolutely had to do, and she doesn't harp on it. It takes a matter of pages and then we move on, but I think that she did it in a really tasteful way. And I also agree with your sentiments. And we're not preaching at anyone for how they
No.
should feel about whether they can or should be separating art from the artist. But I grapple with this whenever I talk about Agatha Christie, because I read a lot of Golden Age mysteries, and Agatha Christie was known for having a lot of views actually that I fully disagree with and I find harmful. There are reasons why I won't recommend specific books by her, because I know that those sentiments bled into her stories. But at the same time, my argument is, well, she's dead. So I'm just like, whatever. And I think that it's definitely a different discussion when we have someone who's living, who's still profiting off of their art, and you can continue to enhance their platform, versus someone who is long dead. And I'm happy to fully discuss and tear her down as a person, because I think that that's the right thing to do whenever I recommend a book by her to someone else. So I'm glad that I just wanted to really address this, because I was like, there's so much that happens in this book, but I found that to be one of the most compelling discussions
Yes.
between this cast of unlikable characters. We don't like any of them. None of them are good. They all have horrible secrets. And yet, I really appreciated this back and forth, this very brief back and forth that they had. Now, to discuss those secrets, we learned a lot in Act Two about what everyone's hiding. I think mostly about what they're hiding in the present. There are still a few nooks and crannies that we need to dig into regarding their past, especially the time that they were in college. But I believe that what we've learned so far, Julius, he does have testicular cancer. So I predicted that correct.
You
I was
did.
like, I'm like, he's got something, it's not necessarily terminal, but he's trying to cope with the fact that when this weekend is over, he's going to be going through surgery. And there are moments where he acknowledges his own privileges, that he being rich and being able to see see doctors of like the highest caliber, get the best treatments, that has helped him. But it's still him dealing with illness, still dealing with a very scary diagnosis. We know obviously from last time that Samira is pregnant, so that's an ongoing secret that she's dealing with. Grace, she is still someone who, I don't know. I think I don't like her the most, actually. The more we learn about her, and it's not much, she remains pretty much in the sidelines for quite a bit. And I find that very suspicious. But we know that she was in communication with Alfred previously. He sent her the first email asking her to encourage everyone else to come, but it seems as though she didn't really know why. I feel like that's really strange. What was she assuming? What kind of
Right.
intimidation or knowledge did he have? And now she knows that Alfred is aware of her affair with TJ. So that's obviously a secret that they have in the present. And Alfred threatened to send I think it was the videotape, a video clip of them to her husband, or audio. It could have been one or the other. But that obviously led her to become very even more submissive to him as far as defending him. And well, now she no longer has that type of fear, but we can discuss that in just a second. TJ obviously is participating in this affair, but it seems like he's running from someone, a stalker or someone threatening him, where the only reason why he said yes to this meetup and why he's staying as long as he's staying is, yes, to see Samira, but also because there's safety in numbers. So that's really sketchy. Who am I missing? I mean, Zoe's a hot mess. She's, dealing with alcoholism, of course, and the secret that is her own restaurant, and how she no longer can even be the chef, that she's basically been kicked out of her own restaurant. And am I missing anyone? I think that I've covered all the guests at
Yeah.
least. But that leaves Alfred, right? What secrets are in his past or in his present? We got a few of them, last time. But one thing is some strange interpersonal relationships, or at least pairings with Alfred and another person. and there being a secret or at least a reveal to be had. So, first and foremost, Alfred and Zoe, we end up pretty much confirming what Zoe has been hinting at, that I think she was either a bystander, a witness, or somehow related to Alfred committing murder. I think that he either openly killed someone or some of his actions led to someone's death. And Zoe has been holding that secret for years and years. And she blames him for her struggle with sobriety, even that it led her down this path to substance abuse even further. Then there's this ongoing, I think it's an open secret, but obviously we as the reader didn't know about it, but most people in the group knew. And that's something that is shared between Grace and Alfred. When they are searching the house for Alfred and for their phones, we have TJ walking up the stairs with Julius and Zoe. And Zoe and Julius kind of make this comment about Alfred and Grace, and TJ's like, "What are you talking about?" And they share a glance thinking, does he really not know what's going on? Let's briefly tell him. Of course, our author Wrobel doesn't include us in this conversation. This summary is not provided to us, so we're still left in the dark. But I have a theory. I think it's that Alfred and Grace did end up having a sexual relationship, whether it be a one night stand or something to that effect. And that's why TJ is kind of, he has this internal monologue at one point where he thinks, oh, well, you know, what's in the past is in the past, or it's understandable things happen in college or something like that, probably trying to separate what he believes he has with Grace, which is something more real because he's actually really in love with her. So, what did you think about all of these secrets, Danny? What do you think about my predictions as far as Alfred's strange secret with Zoe and his possible relationship with Grace in the past?
So many secrets to cover. I'm gonna do the Alfred secrets first because those are fresh in my mind. So, as far as Alfred and Zoe, I think Alfred killed the professor
Me too.
because of what we learned from Julius, which was very strange. Their back
Mm.
and forth and the buildup of them doing things to antagonize one another and how dramatic it got. The fact that Alfred told Julius's father he was selling cocaine to people, and then Julius took it one step further and told, the professor that Alfred was selling and writing essays, which I'm assuming got him kicked out of the class and maybe failed and, you know, prevented him from getting maybe the degree he wanted or maybe the recommendation that he wanted if he was going to use that professor to further his career in the filming industry.
It was
So
also paying for his tuition. They were saying
oh,
that Alfred was dependent on this, obviously, you know, illicit business of selling papers,
oh,
and he was using it
yes.
to pay for his college. So, not to suggest that he was in the right to do this, but I feel like I can empathize with Alfred and at least understand where he was coming from, why he was doing it. So, yeah, that's a good point, and why we keep hearing the mention that Alfred worked for that one hotel chain for years and years. I mean, listen, after you graduate college, you get the job you can. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee that he didn't
Right.
graduate, but I can see things coming together. I get what you're saying.
Yeah. And then I could totally see the secret between Grace and Alfred being in whatever illicit affair when they were in college or whatever. And I could see TJ almost becoming, I feel like in this instance, the author is trying to give us so many people who could potentially have killed Alfred because we haven't gotten to that point yet, but we do know that Alfred is
Rip off
dead.
the band-aid. We've been skirting around this the entire time.
So, I at this point, like, we have Zoe blaming him for her addiction. We have Julius, who has this really horrible history with his parents and Alfred, you know, coming after him. Now, Julius does say that he came here to make amends because of like his health and wanting to kind of change. So I think he's less of like a red herring than everybody else. We have Grace, who has, this maybe sword love affair with Alfred in the past, but definitely something going on, some blackmail. He definitely had the video of her that could have been sent to her husband. So she definitely had a reason to kill him. We have TJ, who is in love with Grace, who didn't like Alfred to begin with. And so I feel like we're being thrown so many things to try and muddy the waters.
Mhm.
We also have the glass of milk that was found with Alfred. I mean, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so I'll stop there. But because that was right before we never heard from Alfred again, he found the glass of milk up in the attic. And so I feel like that leans towards Grace too, because Grace is the one who was like the film buff. But anyway, to go back to the secrets, I do think that I really liked Zoe's, I don't her breakfast that she made them. I thought like it was very not sweet because we didn't even get to see her making it, but she seemed very proud of it. She waited for all of them to take a bite, and just having, I can't remember whose head we were in the moment. If it was Julius, I think it might have been Julius, was saying like, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life, essentially, because she wanted to cook them a meal for breakfast. And he's like, if I cooked every single day, I would definitely wouldn't want to be cooking for a whole bunch of people on my day off. Little do they know that she actually doesn't have her own restaurant anymore. It is truly heartbreaking to see someone who genuinely has a love for their career have that end. And we see that both with Zoe and with Alfred. And then we have Julius and his secret that Zoe finds, which I thought their moment was really endearing as well because he didn't want to tell TJ. He kind of sits down after they climb the stairs to look for their cell phones, I think. And he's out of breath and definitely in pain. And Zoe asks him how he is, and he won't say anything until TJ walks away for a minute. And she leans down and she's like, "You need to tell me. Like something's going on. I know that you're hiding something. Just, you know, let it rip." And he tells her that he has testicular cancer. She hugs him really, really quickly. They have like a brief bonding moment. He makes her a pinky promise that she won't tell anybody because he doesn't want anyone to know. And so, even though they do have dark secrets, we are starting to see some of the friendships come out as well. The noticing of little moments that they used to have in college. Seeing Julius says when Zoe cooked the breakfast that she had a smile on her face, and he realized that she could be really pretty and a pleasant person to be around when she wasn't scowling. So like I do think that we're also getting, along with the lies, we're getting these little pieces of this friend group that used to exist. We're seeing the shattered remnants of the mirror, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's really nice to see because a lot of times in these storylines that have a group of friends coming together after years apart, they're estranged, they have this internal drama, and you end up realizing oftentimes at the end of those books, throughout, that they've all hated each other since the beginning. It's always been a competition. It's always been one-upping each other and, these kind of slights. And I hate that because I'm like, why are you friends? Why are you friends in the first place? I feel as though, yes, there are reasons why one might keep a person or persons in their life who, they have this antagonism about, but I just don't think that it happens that frequently where an entire friend group can't have some type of positive memories. And so seeing little bits of those is really nice because it does show that even though they've come so far and they're very far from who they were, and a lot of secrets have cracked the friendships that they originally had, that there was true friendship there, at least in the beginning. So that's quite nice. With that said, not all of them have been friends, even at college. I mean, you mentioned Julius and Alfred. They always seem to have quite an antagonistic relationship. Even we end up having this realization, a reveal, that Alfred wears turtlenecks all throughout his life since college. And it only started in college, which is an interesting fact, after a remark made by Julius making fun of this very large birthmark that's on his neck. He gives it a name, everyone laughs, and Alfred becomes extremely self conscious to the point where he now only wears turtlenecks. And I think that's really interesting because it impacts our ideas of memory as well, because there were a lot of rumors regarding Alfred. Was it something sinister? Was he coming from, a domestic abuse situation in the home? And of course, it's not like this happened on day one. During his freshman year, at one point, Alfred probably was just wearing, everyday clothes, whatever. And so it's interesting how that probably impacts memory, because people don't think about who you were in the beginning. And they are realizing that no, this is because something happened in college. But there anyway, so I thought that that was quite an interesting perspective of how you don't really notice. There's no one wondering, wait, in the first week of college, I saw him wearing like a t-shirt without a collar. So what's going on here? And yeah, I really appreciate the actually honestly unpredictability of Alfred being the murder victim. It is
Yeah.
leading us to discuss it in like a murder mystery way, which I'm also appreciating, because I think we ended last episode fearing this was more thriller. But now, at least as far as we're discussing the narrative, I feel like this is a mystery because we're trying to figure out who's got the motive. Well, they all have motives. And I honestly, while I was reading this, I was shaking my head and was kind of annoyed, but not in a bad way, because I was thinking, oh man, it's going to be Zoe. Zoe's going to die because she was getting so horribly sick. She had
Yeah.
this moment where she was telling everyone that her food or drink was sweeter than everyone else's. And I was thinking, oh God, arsenic, cyanide, what could it be? And we do have this reveal that she was being poisoned. So obviously she didn't end up dying. But when I was reading that, I was like, this is classic murder mystery 101. She's going to be poisoned and it's going to be her. And I'm going to be annoyed that we predicted the wrong person, but it wasn't even her. So you know what? Props to Wrobel, because I literally thought that, it was actually going to be someone else. And then it ended up being Alfred, our first person POV, by the way. So that's kind of interesting. We also still haven't gotten everyone's. Have we? Have we gotten
Nope.
every? Grace. We're still missing Grace, aren't we? Oh, that son of a gun.
So
Mm-mm.
I
How
thought
did
it
you?
was going to be Grace because of the fact that we didn't have her POV. And then the further I got into Act Two, I was like, we haven't seen Alfred in a while. Why haven't we seen Alfred in a while?
Oh yeah. Well,
And so, but I
when
really did like the reveal. I liked like the fact that they open up the closet. He's laying at the bottom of the ladder, and I was like, like I really didn't. I mean, I did like within Act Two as we continued to get further and further out from seeing him, the suspicions of them, like Zoe being like, Alfred should be here. He's always an early riser and things like that. Like there were moments in time where we were getting closer and closer and closer to the truth that yeah, I eventually was like, it's going to be Alfred, but I had no idea in Act One. I was
Mhm.
not suspicious that he was going to be the murder victim at all. He was the creepy person who's put up this whole setup for the weekend. I totally thought he was going to be the mastermind behind all of it.
Yeah.
Surprise.
No, and you know what? My thoughts shifted as soon as we had that final scene with Alfred where he was going up to the attic and then he suddenly was surprised, shocked at what he saw, who he saw, and I was like, "Oh no, he probably is the, is the murder victim." And that's when, everyone started realizing all of the dirty things that he was playing on them. And now my question is, moving forward, one, we're obviously trying to figure out who ended up killing him. Will there be, more deaths to come? But also, he had a plan this weekend. He was going to execute something, but now that he's dead, how is that going to occur? I'm like, has he put things in motion to the point where they can't be prevented? And now we're going to be wondering, who is orchestrating this? Is this something that Alfred had done previously, or is it now the murderer trying to cover up their tracks? And I think there's going to be potentially some confusion. Is Danny going to continue with the plan in homage to him because of his death? And I think we have to pose this. Is he actually dead? Like, is that something that we have to contemplate? Because I don't know. Like, the description was really good, but they also are in a hotel that is Hitchcockian, and they could probably dress up a body to make it look like he's dead, you know?
Yeah. 100%. That's my prediction, is that, like, that was his plan for the
Mm.
weekend, that he was gonna murder himself, and then 'cause, I mean, in reality, he has an issue with everyone that he's invited, and taking himself off the table, I think, makes them vulnerable to admitting their wrongdoings to him, because, nobody likes to speak ill of the dead, and so I could totally see Alfred planning his own death in, a fake way. I don't know. I kind of I'm a little leery to make predictions because we have an experience with this in the past that we tend to make stories up that we like better than what actually happens.
Mhm.
And so I'm really trying not to do that because I do think it would be very fun if we found out that Alfred isn't really dead.
Yeah, you know what? I wouldn't be disappointed though. I think
No.
that if we realize he's actually dead, there's still a lot of plot that could be played around with these characters pointing the finger at each other and just wondering how this was actually going to play out. And I still think that Danny's going to be an interesting side character because she is in essence an outsider who is now here for the weekend with them. So if she's without Alfred, now where does she sit with all of these characters who have such a long past? And even though she's an outsider, she was the one who was quizzing Alfred. So she knows so much about them. She can stir the pot, and that there's still a dynamic even if Alfred truly is like a cold corpse. like so there's I'm not going to be upset if it is that he's actually really dead, but honestly there's something to this idea of him potentially pretending to be a dead body. And it's reminiscent of a very well known novel that I can't say because that's part of the reveal. And so this is where we get into the interesting element of this podcast where we are full spoilers for the book that we're talking about. But with that said, we will not be spoiling other things. So if you know, you know. So for those listening at home, if there was a certain book that came to mind when we brought up this idea of a fake death, then send me a private message. We can talk about it, but I don't want to reveal anything at all. Or is there anything else that we wanted to cover? Any other crazy reveals or details before we start wrapping things up?
I guess the last thing that I'll mention, I don't really know that I have a ton to say about it. I'm just curious as to the reasoning behind it, is all of the tires on the cars being slashed. And also no one just making an effort then to leave. Like we know that this hotel is set by their college. And I'm assuming that means that it might not be a great walk, but it probably is within walking distance of another establishment that they could go to. And so I don't think if someone was found murdered that I don't think you could keep me in the building. I think I'd be like, "Nope, I'm going." And as soon as I found out my car tires were slashed, I'd be like, "Yep, I'm leaving double time because I'm not staying here where someone wants me to stay." Like, so I am curious, and we know that Danny has, even though she's elderly, she is very strong. So, because I know that it takes a little bit of effort to puncture a tire, and so I couldn't imagine like a super elderly, like decrepit woman going out there and slashing tires, but she seems to be really strong and vivacious for someone who is elderly, and so I do think that she could do it. I don't know if it's her or if it's one of the other people. I know that they're really throwing shade onto Grace because she now seems happier that Alfred is dead. But I don't know. It makes me suspicious that she's not the person who actually killed him. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know at this moment in time. I don't have a prediction as far as that goes. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else that you want to discuss before we end the episode?
Only to echo your own thoughts about the details that you brought up. First and foremost, I understand why Grace would suddenly be back to her own self because if she truly thinks Alfred is dead, well, now her affair is safe because she feels in control of it and that TJ wouldn't divulge what they've been doing to her husband. So, yeah, she'd be on cloud nine. The only times she has kind of been a little bit sketchy is to gain access to Alfred's phone because she wants to erase the blackmail video slash audio that he was going to send to her husband. So I feel like that's something, because we're as readers in the know. That's
Yeah.
I'm just like, we're the one question is, how are everyone else going to take it? Because they totally would be like, huh, that's really weird of you, Grace. So there is that. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure this is taking place in the fall, like in October or something like that. It might have been mentioned. So class is in session. That means even if this very small town is, not the most happening place, if the college is open and people are attending classes, then it is brimming. I attended a very small college myself, and I remember as a tour guide, because I was one of those students, I would say that I'm pretty sure, if the statistic was as I remember it, I think we tripled the number of our population at our small town because of the huge college when it was in session. So my idea is that even if it's a long walk, there's probably people driving back and forth, college kids, like they would meet someone along the road. That person would have a cell phone. They would ask for assistance. And also, what's stopping them from using the landline to, like, if anything, call the police? Like, why hasn't that been, I don't think that's been brought up, at least. I mean, I'm assuming that Wrobel might address it in Act 3 as they're trying to come up with a plan on how to move forward. But yeah, those are kind of the classic things that you would wonder as they're, quote unquote isolated, but they're not that isolated.
Right. Yeah. And I know like Danny is supposed to call the police, and Danny is the reason that she doesn't
Oh
want any
yeah.
of them to leave because she thinks that they're responsible, or at least that's what she says. She thinks that they're responsible for Alfred's death. So there are definitely some things, some explanations that are given to us, but they're not fully fleshed out. I don't know that I believe that they would happen in real life, but this is a book. We're supposed to be having fun. The author's gonna have a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to believability, and that's okay. But I am curious to figure out where we're going to go from here. So, speaking of that, we need to answer our three questions. So, we need to talk about what our rating is currently for the book, who our favorite character is, or I'm going to add in the question that we did last week, which is who is the most intriguing person, if we don't want to say which one's more likable. And then the third question is, what questions do we still have, which we kind of already answered, but maybe you have more.
Well, I actually feel pretty confident to just go into my rating. Usually we kind of try to work our way around it and, create some suspense. But I will say that my enjoyment and my, I don't know, intrigue has increased. I have been enjoying how easy this narrative is. It really is just a very like simple to the point narrative, and it's quite fast paced. I have seen some reveals that have surprised us. We made predictions that didn't come true, and I'm very happy about it. So, because of that, I will raise my rating from a 3.75 to a 4. I'm still going to be tentative. I'm still, distrustful of what may come in the final act. But yeah, I'm thinking this is really fun. And I personally am not minding all of the Hitchcock references, even though I don't really know what's going on. So, that's just one thing that someone may criticize the book for if they're not a big Hitchcock fan. Now, when it comes to most liked character, I mean, Samira remains the most likable character. I still really enjoy Danny, though. She just kind of jumps into the scenario, and then you're like, whoa, well, what's she gonna say, or what's she gonna do? And that, those two characters, I think they're dynamic and they're very different, which is kind of
Yeah.
fun. So while Danny's the most intriguing, obviously Samira remains the most likable. She was way more frazzled, though, in this act, and I feel like we didn't get to see her very often beyond her just freaking out. So I don't know. Maybe that's why my thoughts haven't really changed too much. I'll say my least liked character remains Grace. I don't know. I just don't like her. She's literally not likable, which is crazy because everyone seems kind of obsessed with her. She seems to be kind of the ringleader, and I'm like, she sucks.
Yeah.
Why did everyone like her? Because even Alfred was obsessed with her. And that's a criticism I have a lot of books, when the person who's put on a pedestal is kind of subpar. And I'm like, are we all looking at the same person? But anyways, my question moving forward into Act 3, I might as well just ask it because we were discussing it, is Is Alfred actually dead? Well, there, I said it. Is he dead? Well, we'll find out in the next episode. But Danny, it's your turn. Answer those 3 questions, please.
I actually am going to keep my rating the same as last week. So I am going to keep it at a 4-star. I am enjoying myself. I think that it's been a fun, quick narrative, as you've said. I haven't minded the Hitchcock references either. I don't feel like I'm isolated at all by not understanding certain things. I think the author does a really good job of explaining where certain references come from. And even to the point where some of the films, some of Hitchcock's films are spoiled in this, which I don't mind at all. I think is actually kind of fun to see like where different things come from. And so I do enjoy that aspect. But I'm a little concerned about the ending. As we know from my history in the podcast, the endings are important to me. And I feel like books, especially that lean slightly thriller, their endings are typically disappointing to me. Sometimes because we create our own narratives that I find more enjoyable, but also sometimes I just feel like the authors don't stick the landing. I think that there are so many details or so many missed opportunities that happen at the end of these types of stories. And so I'm a little leery, but we'll find out. As far as my most enjoyable character, I should have said this last week and I didn't even think about it. The professor. I really
Oh,
enjoyed his
yeah.
character. I think that he is fun. I think that his perspective on films is really interesting, the way he organized his class. And I know he's not on page very often, and so I do think he's kind of a forgettable character in that sense. But I don't know. I've enjoyed any time that he's on page. I really like his character. I find him very fun loving and a person that you would want to have as an educator.
Yeah, and actually, to say very quickly, I did kind of feel his pain when there was the discussion with Julius and realizing that so many students were taking advantage of Alfred's paper writing business because that's, it's horrible. I can speak from experience where I've taught at the college level, and we can see it even in the high school level, for instance, when you discover that someone's been cheating, has been plagiarizing, possibly using AI, which is something that I've seen, in this day and age. It really is disappointing because you felt so certain that people were simply listening to you and were actually absorbing everything, putting effort in, and it just ends up being really heartbreaking. So I'm glad that you brought up the professor because, yeah, no, I completely agree. I would have loved to have him as a professor.
Yeah. And as far as my most intriguing character, I don't have a difference in that one. I think it's still just going to be Danny. I'm intrigued to figure out more about her, her backstory, her reasons for being there. All of that's the same. And a question. I do have the same question as you. I want to know if Alfred is still alive, but I want to know Grace's motivations. Like why was Grace here this weekend? Because she didn't know as much as I thought she knew.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes me curious. I still don't think she killed him. I don't. I right here, I am predicting that Grace is not the murderer, even though she's a terrible human being and definitely the most dislikable character in the book. But I just feel like she's too easy to be the murderer.
Mm-hmm. For some reason, that makes it seem like she couldn't have been the murderer
Yeah.
because she's so horrible. It's like, nah, she can't be the killer. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Well, you know what? There's only one thing to do. We're gonna have to finish the book and see if any of our predictions and questions, come to fruition in the way that we hope they do. Do you want to close us off, Danny? Say goodbye to the people at home.
Yes, absolutely. Remember, next week we will be finishing out Act 3. So we're completing the Hitchcock Hotel. We will have our final discussion next Friday. So we would love to have you along with us. If you are interested to read our next book with us in May, we will be reading Inkheart. So get your holds ready or purchase your books. We would love to have you with that conversation too. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. And for reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can listeners find you, Danny?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. What about you?
I have the same platforms. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra _the TBR0. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.